Buonasera, buonasera a tutti, bentrovati. Io parlerò in inglese perché abbiamo un ospite collegato dagli Stati Uniti e non ha la traduzione simultanea, per cui non riuscirebbe a seguire molto bene. Good evening everyone and welcome to the 5th session of this course, which is proving to be very rewarding for us. Gives us satisfaction to see people interested. Tonight we will be talking about volunteering. Bene, un applauso alla Pixar. Sono fantastici. According to the available statistics, half of the people in this room probably work as voluntaries, I guess. Formal volunteering or informal volunteering. Formal volunteering is unpaid work carried out through groups, clubs, or organizations. Or informal volunteering is helping people who are not relatives for free outside the context of formal organizations. Here you can see the distribution of volunteering in Europe, with very high rates in countries such as Denmark, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, and gradually decreasing towards southern European countries, where Italy, unfortunately, does not stand out and is among the lowest. From a social perspective, there are several factors known to influence the frequency of volunteering. Income is certainly important, and there is a clear positive relationship between a country GDP, prosperity, and voluntary rates. After all, people must have means to be able to act as a volunteer. Similarly important is income equality. A country may have a high GDP, but if this income is concentrated in the hands of a small group of people, the number of those who can devote themselves to volunteering will remain relatively low. If, on the other hand, income is distributed more equitably, higher rates of volunteering can be expected. Human capital includes education, skills, and health, and education is a strong indicator of volunteering rates. Employment status is, of course, important, because it's indicative, is indirectly related to financial means available for volunteering, but contributes also to social networks. Social trust predisposed to volunteering. A sense of ethical obligation, a care for the others and society is a strong motivator for volunteering. According to the last edition of European Social Survey, the distribution of social trust values sees at first place Switzerland, followed by Nordic countries. This is in line with the frequency of volunteering, very high in this country. In the context of social prescription, volunteering is probably the activity with the most satisfactory results. And tonight we are joined by two leading experts on the subject, Bev Taylor, testimonial of the tremendous growth of social prescribing in UK, and Stephen Post from New York State, one of the foremost world experts of scientific evidences underlying volunteering. Now I will call here Bev Taylor for her presentation, and I will give some biography notes. Well. Okay. Bev is a community leader who has worked alongside the local communities for 35 years. She's passionate about reducing inequality and giving people power and control over their lives. Between 2015 and 2022, Bev led the National Society Prescribing Program for the National Health Service in England, and also set up the National Academy for Social Prescribing. Bev now works with the Manchester Camerata, an orchestra, a special orchestra, who develops a volunteer-led music cafe for people living with dementia and their caregivers. Thanks to her support, Manchester Camerata has become the first center of excellence for music and dementia across the UK. So, Bev, the room
Thank you.
is yours.
It's great to be here. Thank you for everybody who's in this room. Okay, so that's, hang on. Get it right? Yay. Okay, so volunteering changes lives. We know that. Enzo's explained that to us. Volunteering certainly changed my life. But Enzo's also told us that there are lots of barriers to volunteering, and inequality is one of them. So the UK does not do great either, because we've only got 16% of the population volunteering. there are many barriers to volunteering in the UK. Like, where on earth do you find volunteering opportunities? Do we have the confidence to walk into a room of strangers and say hello and be involved? And what if we've got health issues that are really, really holding us back? And is it going to cost? And what if our culture, our background, is that our families never did that? They're the things that we grapple with in the UK. And that's why we need social prescribing. So, for anybody who's not heard about social prescribing, I'm going to just really quickly tell you about the importance of a person called a link worker. Someone who can connect people to community support, so they don't have to do it themselves. And what we did in the UK is we introduced link workers into GP practices, so that doctors, social workers, anybody could refer people to the link worker, and the link worker has time that the doctor doesn't have to really ask what matters to the person, to build trust, to build a plan, and to connect them to community support. And that's the magic, the holding people's hands and connecting them to community support so that they can be involved. I'm going to tell you about some people whose lives have been changed as a result of this. I want to start with Pauline. Pauline comes from the northwest of England, from Fleetwood. She went to her doctor because she had lung disease, because she was overweight, because she was a carer, because she was really struggling with life. And her doctor referred her to the singing group in the town. She felt she was introduced to the group, she felt supported, she enjoyed it. It helped to reduce the problems she was having with her lungs. It gave her lung strength. But she realized she was the biggest person in the room, and that got her to take power and control for herself over her own life. She lost weight, she volunteered, she got more involved. Pauline's received an award for volunteering nationally. Okay? That's the power of social prescription. Okay, this is somebody really important. This is my dad, Jack Taylor. My dad was a miner, worked underground for many years, never volunteered, lived in the same village all his life. And when my mum died and he'd been a carer for many years, he was really isolated. The only places that he went to were the supermarket and the doctors. So when my dad died and I went to work for the National Health Service, developing volunteering, I realized we needed a new model of care. And the new model of care was that if the doctor had said to my dad, right, Jack, we're going to some community groups, my dad would have gone, okay then, he would have gone. So I did all this in honor of my dad. Let me tell you about tea. So I didn't have a team or money. I didn't have a big national program called social prescribing. But as a community worker, I went around the country and I heard these fantastic stories. And I learned from the real leaders on the ground who were developing social prescribing. And I learned from T. T was in the northeast of England in Gateshead. She had major mental health problems. She didn't speak. She went to the doctors every day. But the doctor eventually referred her to a community cafe where T felt comfortable and really enjoyed it. But the community cafe had funding problems. So because T was growing in confidence and starting to speak, she took herself off to catering college, got a catering qualification, and helped to run the cafe. Now, fast forward a couple of years. In Gateshead, in the northeast, they run a Christmas lunch for over 100 people who are lonely, who would otherwise be on their own. T now leads a team of volunteers who run that Christmas lunch. T is a leader, and her life has been transformed. And this is what she said. She said, I helped with the flu fair, I cooked the Christmas dinner, it's been amazing, this is my life now. I used to visit the GP a couple of times a day. Now they wonder where I am. That's the power of social prescribing. And so I'm going to tell you what we did in England, but I'm also going to spend some time helping you to think how we can build it, everybody in this room, how we can build it in Lugano, in Italy, and how we can enable everybody to be part of their community. So, what we know is that social prescribing reduces loneliness. It gives people more power, more control over their own lives. People who might otherwise be poor, may have very limited power over their lives, are able to do stuff that helps them to feel better. And that film that Enzo showed us illustrated that beautifully. What mattered to me, and I think what matters to everybody here, is that it reduced pressure on the health service. And that's what got people really interested. And also, the people who it helps the most are the people at the bottom of the pile who have the greatest health inequalities. And the evidence is starting to show that is the case, that we help the people with the greatest health inequalities. Let me look at time. Okay. So what did we do in the UK then? In England, I worked with many doctors, family doctors, who really understood that social prescribing could take pressure off them. I worked with the Royal College of GPs. I worked with anybody who'd listen. I worked with local authorities. I worked with community groups, and I worked with volunteers. And we talked to the politicians together. We built a movement, and we talked to the politicians together, and we showed them the reduction in pressure on the health service if we introduce social prescribing. And as a result, we did two things. We put social prescribing into the cross-government loneliness strategy in 2018. And what we also did was put it into the long-term plan for the National Health Service. And the government committed £450 million to employ 4,000 social prescribing link workers, the connector people, into GP practices. Okay, what we hoped was that by 2024, last year, that we would have nearly 1 million social prescriptions as a result of the investment that we made. I am really glad I came here because it helped me to do just a little bit more research and to read the research that the University College in London led last year, because what they found was that there were 5.5 million social prescription referrals to 2024. And what they also found was that there were 9.4 million social prescribing codes used. Codes were things that we put into the GP system so that whenever they referred anybody for social prescribing, they ticked a box, they ticked the code. So not only were social prescribing link workers referring people to community support, doctors were doing it too. That's why we got 9.4 million. Wow, that blew me away when I learned that. So now every GP group in the country, in England, has to provide a social prescribing service. It's part of their contract. They only get the money if they provide a social prescribing service. And the funding for link workers is now permanently in the GP budgets. In 2020, I set up the National Academy for Social Prescribing. They've been working with people around the world. Post-COVID, we set up a Thriving Communities program to really help those communities most impacted by COVID. We developed social prescribing champions, which I'm going to tell you some more about, and we built some evidence, and the evidence I've explained. But you could ask, so what? So what? What difference did it really make? So, two things. One is the National Institute for Health Research in 2025 analysed 5 million health records in England. They found that where people had a social prescription, they were much more able to manage their long-term health conditions. It was really helping them to cope. And for the health service, these were the benefits. In Greater Manchester, 42% less GP appointments as a result of social prescribing. That's 42% less people going into the GP practice. Less attendance at accident and emergency. So in Kent, around 20% less accident and emergency appointments. But for people who use the National Health Service more, frequent users, nearly 40% less attendance at accident and emergency. So the figures speak for themselves. Social prescribing reduces pressure on the health service, as well as improving people's lives. How am I doing for time? Just check. Okay, we're okay. So, it's great to be here. What do we do now? How do we, that's right, okay. How do we build it? Everybody in this room. okay? For me, my experience was we build a movement. We need everybody. So we need the doctors, we need the politicians, we need the local authorities and the health service, but we need volunteers, we need community activities, community groups, we need everyone to build it together. And let's forget those hierarchies, because they're not helpful. If we're building it together, we're all leaders. We all have an equal part to play. So I tried to be brave, and I tried to ask for forgiveness, not for permission. So I found really great people to work with everywhere and supported them. And that's what enabled us to get the politicians on side. So for me, shared leadership, everybody here being involved, is what makes the difference. And the other thing that we worked really hard on was, what's the game changer? What's the one thing that will make the biggest difference? People came to me, they wanted to talk about all kinds of things. I was like, whoa, I could only deal with one thing. And that was introducing the link worker into the GP practice. Because they were then the infrastructure to build social prescribing. So those link workers really matter, because they can help people to volunteer. And it starts with us. So I'm sure Stephen Post is going to tell you some of this, but we use 5 ways to well-being in the UK because it's about giving. That film showed us that if we're giving, we're much happier. We're much healthier. Guess what? We live longer. Stephen Post is going to tell you all about that. But if we're observant and we take notice and we connect with other people, help our neighbours, make new friends, say hello to people in the street, that really helps us as well as everybody else. And the miracle cure for me is being active, whether that's physically active, socially active. If we're active, if we're moving, if we're getting out there, we're alive and we are looking after ourselves. And we never ever stop learning. And the more we learn, the more we share, the better it gets. Stephen Post is going to tell you more. But for us, link workers in the UK use this tool. And I want to introduce you to somebody really special. This is Bogdan. Can I ask you to put your hand up if you are a medic or a medical student, please? Hands up. Okay, fabulous. I hope to inspire you. Bogdan came to me as a second-year medical student. He said, I really like this social prescribing thing. Can I work with you, Bev, as a volunteer? Yeah, okay. He said, I'd like to recruit a social prescribing champion in every medical school across the country. Is that okay? So I went, yeah, okay, right, let's work on it together. So Bogdan recruited social prescribing champions. We brought them together for conferences. We supported them with resources, with information. And by 3 years, every medical school had a team of social prescribing champions within their medical school. So a group of medical students who supported each other to build it. And then, a few years later, those medical students had changed the medical curriculum to introduce the wider determinants of health and social prescribing. Nobody else had managed that, but the young medical students really understood the power of connection and how important this work is. And so now they are building it everywhere, thanks to Bogdan. Okay, so I'm no longer doing that social prescribing job. I work in Greater Manchester in the north, and I work with our Mayor, Andy Burnham, on a programme called Live Well. And Live Well is about enabling every citizen to live well and to improve their well-being through volunteering, through whatever enables them to be well. So I've got some ideas for you. Okay, we're okay for time. Okay, so community connectors, buddies, champions. These are all things that are happening across England in pockets, not everywhere, but that's got lots of potential. Community connectors. So in Somerset, in other areas as well, they're training taxi drivers, shopkeepers, people who are homeless, people who are hairdressers. They're training teachers. They're training the whole community to become community connectors. It's very light touch. Everybody gets a postcard with contact details for the community library or the community hub. And then when people are going about their everyday business and they find someone who might be a bit vulnerable, they give them a postcard and encourage them to go to the community hub. And at the community hub, the staff then either connect people to community groups or they send them to the social prescribing link workers. And the link workers spend time with people. So I'd love it if you could really get your heads around community connectors. What about buddies? So I live in York, in the northeast of England. We've got a project called MoveMates. MoveMates are volunteers, and the social prescribers send them to people who are housebound, who can't get out, but would like to. They may not be physically very well, or they might not have the confidence to leave the house. So what the MoveMate does is stand on the doorstep and have a conversation and build the relationship, and then over time encourage the person to walk down the street to the end of the garden or the yard, or to go and sit on a park bench, and eventually to get the people involved in walking groups or whatever the people want to be involved in. And there's a project called Nature Buddies in Nottingham, where the buddies are doing exactly what I've said, but taking people to gardening projects, to green projects, as a way of getting more volunteers, of helping people to get involved in a way that's comfortable for them. I think this has got lots of mileage. Okay, this is me, Music Champions. This is Greater Manchester. My project, Manchester Camerata, where we've developed 20 music cafes across Greater Manchester for people living with dementia and their carers. We train ordinary people, citizens, to become music champions, and we train them how to run music groups. Over the last 2 years, we've trained 130 plus volunteer music champions. And what they're doing is they're enabling people living with dementia to reduce stress and to have a good time. And what we know is that music enables people with dementia to come back in a way that nothing else does. I've just got 2 more things to tell you. Oh, it's not working. Yes, okay. Wouldn't it be great if everybody who has a long-term health condition that needs ongoing support could have social prescribing built into their care pathway? So if you've got cancer or heart disease, lung disease, dementia, you could have a social prescription as part of your care. We're doing that in some places in the UK, not everywhere, but that enables people to be more active, to connect with each other, to be part of stuff, and to stay well for longer. It reduces the pressure on the health service. Last thing from me, children and young people. There's an organisation called Barnardo's in the UK, and they've written a report called The Missing Link. And what they're calling for is for every young person in a school or college who needs support to build resilience, to get their voices heard, to be more confident, to deal with their mental health, to have social prescribing. So that could be gardening groups, it could be running together, it could be making music together, it could be whatever matters to young people. And many of the young people will end up organising those activities themselves and volunteering. But we need that as part of schools, what schools and colleges do. That's part of the future for me. So, thank you for listening. Can we build it together, please? Gandhi said, "Be the change you want to see in the world." That's a bit of a challenge, but hey, we're up for a challenge. So I'd love to hear more about how you're building social prescribing, how you're enabling people to connect with each other, and most significantly, how you're enabling people who aren't involved to volunteer, to connect, to be part of something. Because our human condition is that we want to belong to something. That's what matters. Thank you.
Dear Bev, many thanks for your excellent, clear, and above all, passionate presentation. We have learned many tips how to make social prescribing a successful story in Lugano, I think, but For myself, maybe in Milano. Now we fly to America to connect with a very special person, Professor Stephen Post. I don't know if we can... yes. We can have his view and his voice. Okay, I make a brief presentation of Professor Post. He is director of the Center of Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care and Bioethics at Stony Brook University School of Medicine in New York State. He is the author of more than 400 papers in a journal, top journal, including the New England Journal of Medicine. He is a prominent research scholar on altruism, compassion, and health. Best-selling author of the book Why Good Things Happen to Good People, very famous book, and other books like The Moral Challenge of Alzheimer's Disease, Ethical Issues from Diagnosis to Dying, Encyclopedia of Bioethics, The Fountain of Youth, Cultural, Scientific, and Ethical Perspective on a Biomedical Goal. He is the founder of the Institute for Research on Pure Unlimited Love, which is based in Cleveland University Circle, but is active across the US and worldwide. His work bridges science, spirituality, and ethics with a mission to understand how unselfish love heals, uplifts, and transforms both individuals and cultures. So, Stephen, the floor is now yours, and now we are eager to listen to your talk. Please.
Thank you very, very much, Enzo, and Bev as well. Let me just get my PowerPoint up, if I might. Hold on one second here. I think that will do it. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Fantastic.
Can you hear
Okay.
me?
We see the PowerPoint
good.
and hear you clearly. Go on.
Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to work through some scientific material, but it's more than scientific. It's also very consistent with volunteering and explaining why it actually is beneficial for health and well-being. Now let's see. Let me get this. Okay. So this is a picture by a well-known American illustrator, Norman Rockwell. It goes back to about 1960, before the civil rights movement was underway. And this was the cover of Look magazine. And you'll see he has everybody mindfully attentive to the words, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's the positive version of the golden rule. It requires more imagination, more commitment than the negative view, which is do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. These are people from every color and ethnicity and religion and gender, and it's a beautiful image that hangs iconically in the United Nations. The little girl on the lower left is Ruby Bridges, who was the founder of the civil rights movement in America when she was a little girl being escorted into a public school in New Orleans. So I wanted you to just have this impression that all these individuals are putting their minds on the golden rule. And if you look at their faces, I actually heard Rockwell speak about this when I was a kid. They're looking, well, you think about it, but they're looking kind of tranquil, kind of serene, kind of focused, and they're curiously thinking to themselves, how can I contribute to the lives of others? And that's actually a formula for social prescribing. When I got here at Stony Brook in 2008, I had come from 20 years actually at Case Medical School in Cleveland, Ohio. The United Healthcare company got in touch with me, and they wanted to know, is it really true that helping others helps you as well? So in the beginning of 2010, we did a survey of Americans, and we found out that 41% volunteered in 2009. For how long? About 100 hours a year. Our rates of volunteerism in the US are fairly high at their best. And then we asked questions of the volunteers that had to do with what we call positive psychology. Did this volunteering improve your sense of well-being? 89%. Did it lower your stress levels? Think about that picture, serenity, tranquility. 73% said yes. 92% enriched sense of purpose in life. 68% made me physically healthier. 77% improves emotional health. 78% said helps from recovery from loss and disappointment, recovery from loss and disappointment. It improves sleeping, reduced anxiety, and it goes on. It's really quite amazing. If you could package that in some new pill, I guarantee you it would be the best-selling medication in Italy, because it's really quite powerful and quite pervasive. So just a little story. Some friends of mine here at Stony Brook did a study on widows and widowers who had had meaningful, happy marriages for many years, and now they were on their own. And as would be expected, they go through a period of loss and disappointment, of grief and bereavement. So what we found out is that the ones who could self-report helping activities, either formally through volunteering or informally just through their local associations, they were doing better. They were getting through the grief and bereavement more quickly and in a more enduring fashion. So I got a call from the New York Society of Widows and Widowers to come in and give a talk, which I did. And at the end, of course, I was emphasizing the intrinsic, internal benefits of this kind of behavior. It's not transactional. It's not pay me back. It's just the internal benefits that accrue when you get away from the self and the problems of the self. And this has a big biological basis. Even Darwin understood this very well toward the end of his life. And so there was a guy in the back of the room, and he started waving his hands fairly frantically. And he said, "I don't care what you say, buddy. I don't do nothing for nothing." I don't think you would hear that in Milan, of course, but we heard it in New York that day. And I asked this fellow, "Are you happy living that way?" And he said, "I've never been very happy." "Are you always thinking about payback, tit for tat?" And he said, "Most of the time." And I said, "We need to help you get away from that." And I talked with him, and I don't know if it worked, but hopefully he has a more fulfilling life now than he did previously. So social prescribing, the NHS, we heard so nicely from Bev Taylor, it can succeed, but in every area of treatment, it is complex and distinctive in implementation. This is a little article from the New England Journal of Medicine, but physicians need reliable information on what interventions work best and for whom, and how social prescriptions can best be integrated into conventional medical practice. When are the link workers most effective? They're very interesting people. What we found in some of our studies on volunteerism around the hospitals and the health systems is, number one, give potential volunteers a choice. We have a big, thick book with pictures, and they can decide where they want to be doing their volunteering. That kind of autonomy, that kind of self-determination is very, very helpful to them. Also, they get a choice. They get a choice when it comes to what they want to do. Are they interested in something they're familiar with and feel confident about? Or do they want to do something that's totally new? It's a mixed bag. And then finally, it's very important toward the end of the day when they're wrapping things up to debrief. That's very important in terms of the health benefits. Letting people sit down and talk about what they experienced, how they felt about it, what were the high points. That makes a huge difference in the outcomes. So let's talk about kids first. In a world where you can be anything, be kind. One of my colleagues, Paul Bloom at the Yale Child Studies Center, has studied toddlers between 6 months and 6 months and 1 year. And what he's determined, I won't go through this research, but he's determined that they actually have an innate sense of empathy. It's very well-known research. They're not just nasty, swashbuckling cretins. They have an inherent sense of empathy. And that's important because people have argued about the nature of the child for a long time. This kind of emotional or affective empathy is fairly hardwired. But sometimes we push the wrong buttons. So in this book, Scream-Free Parenting, it teaches us that about 98% anyway of American parents at some point scream bloody murder at their young children. And there's no reason for that. And it actually inhibits their natural empathic qualities. There's a lot of work that a lot of you have heard about on attachment and kindness. If you have kids who are attached successfully with their parents, and if you cultivate their capacity to kind giving, then in their 20s, when they're identified by their peers, they're the ones who are defined as being more caring and more kind and more generous. The Harvard study on adult human development, which started in 1952, followed college students and inner city Bostonians for many, many years. And at some point, they asked them, so can you tell us about your relationship with your parents? And it turns out that the ones who had secure, good memories of relationship with parents had much different levels of diagnosis in midlife. They had lower blood pressure, lower rates of heart disease, ulcers, alcoholism, and so forth. We had one scholar, Redford Williams, who was the head of the cardiology program at Duke University, and he took something called the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. This is 1950s, looking retrospectively. And these are medical students and law students. And he looked at how they did on this inventory, which measures emotions, especially hostile emotions, hostility, rumination, and so forth. And we know that protracted negative emotions elevates certain hormones associated with stress, and you have higher rates on average of vascular disease because metabolites are converted into fatty acids, hippocampal atrophy, which is a hallmark of a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, and about 20% slower wound healing. This is not controversial at all. So when you can be involved in giving to others not just externally, but actually with an attitude of kindness, it's extremely good. So these individuals took these tests in 1950 when they were 25. By the time they were 50 years of age, the high quartile givers had a 2% mortality rate. The low quartile givers had a 20% mortality rate. And so this book, Anger Kills, points out that those negative, bitter, hostile, ruminating emotions are very bad for your health, both mentally and physically. There's a passage in Leviticus, do not seek vengeance or bear a grudge, but love your neighbor as yourself. And in the process, you're also loving yourself. We resurrected a study that began at Berkeley University way, way back in the 1920s, where they were interviewing young people, 300 preteens, that means 12-year-olds. About a third of these 12-year-olds identified themselves as wanting to contribute to humanity. And that group was at the whole 300. They were followed for 50 years. The helping group was relatively free from depression, anxiety, and physical illnesses. And now they've been studied even in their 90s and beyond now. And the ones who define themselves as having ambitions to be helpful and kind and volunteering, they lived considerably longer than the others. So that's pretty impressive. If you think about addiction disorders, alcoholism and the like, there's no question that the helping activities in a movement like Alcoholics Anonymous is very healing. In fact, it's the most healing intervention that you can do for an adolescent who has an addiction disorder. We've studied vascular disease in a Vancouver, Canada high school. Grade 10 students. The subjects volunteered just 1 hour per week for 10 weeks. The controls were waitlisted. The volunteers had reduced inflammation and cholesterol levels, lower body mass index, especially in those reporting increases in empathy and well-being. And these, of course, are biomarkers that predict cardiovascular disease, which is spreading in adolescence. We supported a wonderful researcher named Thomas Licona, who was really interested in how to raise kind kids. If it's really good for children to be kind, if it's healthy, if it makes them happier, if it makes them live longer and better lives, how can we as parents figure out more systematic ways to give rise to kindness in our children? So he did this study, and it was very well received. It's a national study. Have a family mission statement on the wall of your home, maybe in the kitchen where people gather together. Have a statement that lays down the values that your kids and you as parents believe in. This is one example from the James family. We are kind, honest, respectful. We don't hurt others or lose our temper. We express gratitude. We do our chores. We eat as a family. We do kind acts together. Family volunteering is very helpful when the kids and the parents volunteer, especially beyond their own nearest and dearest ethnic group. So when they get out into the world and do things for all humanity as a subset, it's very beneficial. So what is success? I like to think that success really is kindness, making caring common. 80% of teens value achievement over kindness. And that's not the best thing in the world, because it gives them the problem of what we call affluenza. So it's important to have kids who value kindness over career. Career is always important, but career can never displace or take the place of kindness. At our medical school, I hired a documentary physician filmmaker who did this very, very well-known documentary called Screenagers. And what we know is that kids who are totally locked into their screens and their various iPhones and the like are less happy on the whole. There's a researcher now at the University of California in San Francisco who's coined the term and studies it very carefully, AI psychosis. AI psychosis. How many suicides do you think have occurred among adolescents in America who are just locked into AI in one way, shape, or form or another, not really interacting socially and in real time, in real life? It's very high. And Google is being sued heavily by families who have lost loved ones. And these are loved ones who did not have histories of depression, but they were engaged with AI. And AI is very good at cognitive empathy. It can give you instructions, it can respond to certain things, but it can also lead you down a very deadly path because it doesn't have, if you want to use the word love, tender loving kindness, it's not committed to your well-being. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends electronic fasts, which means reset your child's brain. That helps a lot. Get them away from these devices so they can have real interactions, because the devices are linked to chronic irritability, poor focus, depression, meltdowns, and oppositional defiance. So you can go to this website, resetyourchildsbrain.com. It's a very interesting website full of good empirical information. This is a book that the now deceased billionaire investor, Sir John Templeton, wrote, The Worldwide Laws of Life. I had the honor of writing a foreword for that. That's Sir John, a little bit younger me, and that's signing his book at Westminster in England for the members of Parliament. His laws of life: gratitude, kindness, honesty, service, humility, perseverance, patience, vision, thrift, forgiveness. Humility, he thought, was the mother of all virtues, because when you're humble, you're not trying to puff up your own identity. You're not trying to fill up the room with yourself. You make room for others, and that's important to kindness. So I want to just comment that in 2000, I was able to get Sir John together with Marty Seligman, the founder of positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. We got together with a lot of leading researchers, and that's when we decided that we weren't interested in disease-based psychology anymore. We wanted to do positive psychology, talk about things like kindness, generosity, forgiveness, service, and the like, and see how that would affect health in the long run. So we founded these institutions at all these great universities: Berkeley on Purpose, Chicago, Penn, Forgiveness at Virginia Commonwealth, Oxford got Humility, Awe at Berkeley, Gratitude at UC Davis. It's a long list. That's just a picture of an elderly Sir John who's been now dead for about 15 years, and his older brother. He was a very happy man. We've had national studies of older adults at places like Stanford and Berkeley. More frequent volunteering is associated with delayed mortality, even when the effects of socio-demographics, medical and disability characteristics, self-ratings of physical activity and social integration and support are controlled for. There's no controversy about this. Preventing hypertension in older adults. Some of you may want to go into geriatrics. 1,100 older adults between 51 and 91 years of age were interviewed and had blood pressure checks in 2006. The subjects who were volunteering at least 200 hours or 4 hours per week in the past year at the time of their interview were 40% less likely to have developed hypertension 4 years later compared to non-volunteers. Another one, cardiovascular disease. In this study, spending up to 200 hours over the prior 12 months helping others was strongly associated with lower odds of a new CVD event and of depression. So these studies are now very commonplace in England, in parts of Europe, certainly in Canada and the United States. Now, one of the things I'm most proud of is the development near the Pennsylvania border of Eastern Ohio of hopewell.cc. This is an institution that is based on a 350-acre farm that was owned by the Amish, by the Mennonites and the Amish. And it was purchased by a friend of mine in Cleveland, Clara Rankin. And it has, at any one time, roughly 200 people with schizoid affective disorders or bipolar. And they live there. And they have medications. Physicians come in from the Cleveland Clinic, and they do medicate these individuals, but the individuals use about 1/10 of the medication that you would usually prescribe in a psychiatric clinical environment. Why? Because so much of their problems are social and relational in emphasis. And they have these small groups. You see them there at a table, the 5 or 6 of them, and they're all divided into these small groups. And they spend a week, they're doing all kinds of pro-social activities. They're serving their community. They're out baling the hay, bringing in the eggs from the chicken coop. They're doing all kinds of wonderful things that they enjoy, but they're also reflecting. This is the whole thing of debriefing about their activities. So they'll spend a week talking about kindness. They'll keep a kindness notebook. They'll try to express the inner dynamics of feeling the beauty of kindness in their lives. They'll talk about it empirically, spiritually, whatever they want to do. And they form community around kindness. And then they might shift to forgiveness for a week. And then they might shift again. They'll go through all of the 10 or 15 major areas of positive psychology and do that in several months. And it's very healing. In fact, Hopewell is so successful that it is now the model for the American Association for Residential Treatment. There are 80 programs across the United States that are designed following the Hopewell model. They do moral treatment. That is how psychiatry began. Now, of course, I'm glad to see it in social prescribing. But look, moral treatment goes back to the 1870s, when in Philadelphia, the American Association for Psychiatry was founded by two Quakers, one of whom was named Thomas Scattergood, and they would allow people with these problems to go out and to serve others under some guidance, of course. And they also spent a lot of time in natural settings, in naturalistic settings. They also did, in their own way, small groups of positive psychology, giving forgiveness. Gratitude is a big one. And once they finish their 6 months at Hopewell, they go into the inner cities and they do inner city farming. It's very interesting. I'm not going to talk about the 12-step program, except to say that it's the most successful program in world history for decreasing depression levels and for decreasing addiction. As Bill Wilson wrote in the Big Book, which is sort of the AA mantra, our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help their needs. So if you have a clinic that deals with people with opioid or alcohol dependence, this is a great approach. Now, you medical students, because I deal with medical students every day. I've taught at the University of Chicago, Michigan, 20 years at Case Western, and 16 years here at Stony Brook. This is an interesting study from the Journal of the American Medical Association. Google it, check it out yourselves. Medical student empathy protects against residency burnout. When you do volunteering in social prescribing, it's not just the actions, but it's cultivating a kindness. Mother Teresa said, it's not how much giving you do, but it's the kindness involved in the giving. So a higher reported level of empathy during medical school was associated with a lower risk of reported symptoms of burnout during residencies. That's a pretty interesting finding. Older adults who rated high quartile on a purpose of life scale, and remember that people who are doing social prescribing are more altruistic, and altruists generally are high quartile in this regard. They have a 30% lower rate of cognitive decline in the lower quartile, which is to say that that elevated purpose that you get from social prescribing is beneficial. It protects you from Alzheimer's disease and several other diseases that are associated with dementia. So I talk about love, not love of chocolate. I'm sure a lot of you like chocolate, not love of leather jackets. I'm wearing my favorite Levi's leather jacket because it's cold as heck in my office. But what is love? I use a definition from a psychiatrist at the University of Chicago. I'm a U Chicago product through and through. When the happiness and security of another is as real or meaningful to you as your own, and sometimes more so, you love that person. Now, there's no Latin, no Greek, no ancient languages involved here. I come to work every day in a clinical setting, and love is my guiding image. I don't speak of love directly, but think about all the ways that you as medical students on a daily basis manifest love. You listen to patients. That's a form of love. You celebrate one another. You engage in forgiveness. You engage in compassion, creativity, loyalty, respect, carefrontation, which is different than confrontation and is different from tough love. But sometimes you have a patient and you really have to kind of help them get back on track. So that's carefrontation. And I think about the people I'm going to encounter, including patients, but also colleagues. And I ask myself early in the morning in meditation, what kind of love do they really need? And I'm usually pretty close. And this helps my day go well. And I'm a more healing individual through this early morning meditational practice. I did write a book, Why Good Things Happen to Good People, How to Live a Longer, Healthier, Happier Life by the Simple Act of Giving. And that lays out a lot of that. That was in 2007. What is the right prescription? For whom? When? At what level? So in general, and this gets into social prescribing, for older adults, we've shown that it's 3 to 4 hours ideally. It's not so much doing this all day long or even a half a day, but just 3 or 4 hours is an excellent prescription. And for teens, it's probably 1 or 2 hours. And that involves something that we call the shift effect. You shift from rumination or negative emotions to positive emotions. So how to manage volunteering is absolutely key. And I mentioned earlier the choice of venue, the choice of activity, taking the time to debrief in small groups. This is the Good Samaritan window by the great artist Marc Chagall. I just love to show it because it has symbols from every spiritual tradition known to humanity. And he was all about the color of love, which is, for him, blue. So I just want you to be aware of the depth of the scientific background that's been ongoing at great universities around the world. And it's important because in the end, social prescribing, and it doesn't have to take the form of volunteering, it can take the form of sharing an artwork. You can be taking people to the art museum and helping them to be observational with regard to works of art. In fact, that's very, very good for diagnostic accuracy with you medical students. In 3/4 of our medical schools in the US, we have courses on art and observation. Of course, in Milan and Italy, generally, that's the epicenter of great art historically in the Renaissance. But what happens is that when you guide people through a question session and you ask them, can you observe this or that? Where's the circle in this image by Chagall? There is one, and I won't get into it right now, but maybe you can notice it. But they sharpen neurologically their ability to make observations. And in a world where a lot of your diagnosis isn't coming from stop, look, listen, touch, but it's coming from that computer printout down the hallway that gives you some numbers, well, that doesn't always work. I know a person, a physician, not here, who relied so heavily on the printouts and the numbers that he didn't even stop by the patient's room on the way home. And if he had, he would very quickly have discerned that that patient had a pulmonary embolism. He came in the next morning and the patient was dead, and he wanted to quit medicine. So I had an opportunity to speak with him, and I quoted Martin Luther King, the great civil rights figure, "Those who make no mistakes make nothing." And we talked about this for a while, that making mistakes comes with the territory of being a medical student or being a clinician. You'll always have mistakes, but hopefully you can minimize them if you stop, if you look, if you listen. And we did an article in JAMA not too long ago called The Lost Art of Touching, because touch has always been crucial to good diagnostic capacity. So I bring these things to your attention because I want you to realize that going into social prescribing is a beautiful thing. I don't usually recommend it for people who have very busy clinical days and activities because they're already so exhausted. I want them to put their feet up and get some rest. But on the other hand, we do have programs for volunteers at this medical school and at many others, and without overdoing it, because you don't want to overdo it. It doesn't take that much. That's why the prescription is important. 3 to 4 hours for older adults, a few hours maybe for adolescents, maybe a couple of hours for medical students is all you need. But now they're so engaged, as they never were 20 years ago, with volunteering because they're interested in social determinants of health. And they want to be working with minority groups. They want to be working with groups who are underserved. So it just now comes with the territory. I'm going to wind up here now, if I can, Enzo and Bev, and I'll just open this up. I'll stop sharing, and then you'll see a little better view of my motorcycle jacket. Thank you. Any questions, any thoughts?
Professor Post, dear Stephen, thank you very much. Many thanks for your outstanding talk. We would remain listening you for hours. Really. Now we have some space for question and answer. And did you hear the applause? Many applause, eh?
No, there were no applause.
Okay, in the registration, you will be aware of what happened in the room. Okay, now we have the possibility to ask questions to Bev Taylor and Stephen Post. Please keep this occasion to explore something that has excited your fantasy?
Hi, a question for Dr. Taylor. You said that you work with the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, and okay, that is, I read somewhere that maybe he can become the next Prime Minister of UK. I don't know if the question is, are those policies beyond the parties or are left tax and spend policies? So in an eventually if Nigel Farage came to become the next Prime Minister, he will be focused on, I don't know, small business, immigration, and stuff like that, or he keep with those kind of policies?
Great question. I've been really surprised that social prescribing has, I've worked with politicians across the political spectrum. I've worked with Conservative politicians, and Theresa May, the Prime Minister of England, a few leaders back, was very, very supportive. I've been surprised by how social prescribing allows people to work across the political spectrum, and I expected to get more support from left-leaning people, and that didn't always happen. So I have the mantra of find good people everywhere, find what you have in common and work with them, and that really helped. I have to say, now that we have a Labour government, they are supportive of social prescribing, but they are now wanting to move forward beyond social prescribing and put community workers into GP practices. So community workers can actually go out and knock on people's doors and not wait for people to come into surgeries. So that's really interesting. Andy Burnham has this passion around live well. And he wants to develop in Greater Manchester this live well programme that can mean all kinds of things, but means that people can live well whatever their circumstance. So I think we've got to work with everybody, whoever they are, wherever they are on the political spectrum. That's not easy, but I think that's our task.
Okay.
My own one comment on this is that, you know, in general, when we think about, for example, older adults, we think of Meals on Wheels and providing them the things that they do need desperately, and that's very important. But equally important for living well is their involvement in pro-social volunteer activities. So you want to have both working in your institutions and both being effective. So I like to teach students and clinicians that there are two sides. You want your patients to be getting what they need, but also being encouraged and helped in doing unto others.
Okay, thanks. Other question? Là in fondo.
I have a question for Steve Post. Yeah, so you were talking at the beginning of the need to take informed decision for the doctors, so the doctors prescribing this social prescription. And then you mentioned AI at some point. So my question is, do you think there is enough data and enough literature on this topic so that AI can be a toolbox, can be part of the toolbox of a doctor for prescribing these kind of activities?
I am agnostic. I do not have an answer to that. I will say that the guy who got the Nobel Prize for AI quit Google. And he quit it because he didn't feel that AI could ever be truly pro-social. AI is a machine. And the reason why it has limitations is because it doesn't have the capacity for kindness and love. And my experience, having run social prescribing in Cleveland, Ohio for once upon a time years back, is that that quality, that emotional quality is so incredibly important. And the ability to sit down and draw that out from volunteers makes a big difference. So I don't think AI is the solution. Now, you know, it may have something to offer at some level, but in the end, I'm not very optimistic about AI in these kinds of pro-social circumstances, because they're not inherently, shall we say, loving entities.
Thank you.
Okay. Stephen, I have a question for you. Is religiosity an important factor to predispose to volunteering? Very important.
Is what?
Religiosity, religion.
Religiosity. Well, you know, if you look at the studies on religiosity, it is the case that religiosity contributes somewhat to higher levels of volunteering, but it is not a necessity by any means. And an awful lot of people are very good humanistic volunteers, and they have no background in religiosity. However, a lot of people who do have religious background take more naturally to volunteering because that's been emphasized, hopefully emphasized, in their upbringing, and their family's been connected with some, whether it's a mosque or a synagogue or a church, whatever it might be. Volunteering is more part of their MO, if you will. And I think that can be helpful. And there have been studies, and religiosity can make a beneficial difference.
Okay. And among the various religions, which is for you the religion that is a more powerful predisposition?
I don't know. I have friends who might know. Harold Koenig at Duke studies this every day of his life, but I don't really know. I think that any religion at its best encourages love of neighbor. Not just the negative golden rule, do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. That just means that you can get home tonight, and if you have not elbowed some innocent person in the back, you can feel very good about yourself. But hopefully you have more than that to offer the world. So you will, by fulfilling by using your imaginations, your creativity, as medical students, as professionals, for anybody in society, you know, you can heal with kindness. And that's what we're about here. And that's what I think social prescribing needs to focus on, healing with kindness. And how can we really make that a big part of our society and our lives? Now, there are forms of altruism that are kindness free. You know, there are people who are simply being altruistic because it comes with their role and their position, their job in life. They're rescuers, they're firemen, they're policemen, and whatever. But what we really want is to have people raised up in such a way that, drawing on their inherent compassion, they engage in acts of kindness.
Okay, thanks. Other questions from the audience? Otherwise, since the time is now good enough to finish the evening, I thanks very much Stephen Post for his participation from US, and of course Bev Taylor from New York. He did a very nice job and nice travel to Lugano. So now I switch in Italian to present the next evening. La prossima settimana, lunedì prossimo, avremo una lezione speciale dedicata alla solitudine e inclusione sociale. È un altro gigantesco contenitore dal punto di vista delle evidenze scientifiche, mediche, e abbiamo la fortuna di avere con noi Julianne Holt-Longstad, che è una delle più grosse esperte mondiali sull'importanza delle connessioni sociali. E d'altra parte un testimonial di tutto rispetto, Cristiano Figueiredo, che viene da Lisbona, che ci racconterà una storia molto interessante su come medico di famiglia lui prese la decisione di creare un modello di prescrizione sociale in Portogallo, in Lisbona in particolare, che credo sia un modello probabilmente anche accessibile da parte di chi vive in paesi come l'Italia o eventualmente anche la Svizzera, perché il modello inglese è veramente molto strutturato, molto standardizzato, e forse per il momento è ancora un po' troppo difficile per noi come tempo di realizzazione. Forse quello portoghese potrebbe avere un approccio più semplificato. Quindi spero di vedere molte persone dalla settimana prossima. So che stasera c'è stato un evento importante qui a Lugano e forse l'aula è un po' più vuota proprio per questo. Benissimo, allora buona serata e grazie della partecipazione.